So this video is going to be about book reviews, and it's preparing all of us in our discussions for the writing assignment of this week of October 20th through submitting a writing assignment for October 23rd. And we'll talk more about book reviews in class on the 20th. So just so that it's not too confusing, I'm pre-recording the video in advance, and so if you watch this before the 20th, this is relating to the writing assignment of the week of Tuesday the 20th through Friday, October 23rd. But never too early to talk about book reviews, which will be the topic of the assignment, and we will discuss it as well in class. So book reviews, I mention in the asynchronous portion of our Google document for the 20th that I have a question for all of you about your engagement or your experience, either as just a reader of book reviews or if you have written them. I don't know if some of you have, I believe this is the case, some of you may have some journalism experience or have done freelance writing, which is my case. I've worked for a bunch of different magazines and journals, including just our local 7 Days newspaper, where I have written restaurant reviews and book reviews, but also the Iowa Review and McSweeney's, etc., etc. However, I also am just an avid reader of book reviews, and I mention in the text in our Google document that I really obsessively read as many book reviews as I can from Harper's, The New Yorker, The New York Times, The Guardian, as many sources as I am able to get my hands on without hitting paywalls. I do subscribe to The New Yorker and The New York Times, so I struggle to keep up with both of those, which come in print to my house, and I have a stack of book reviews. That's basically, I do sometimes get around to reading other aspects like the cartoons and other essay features, but the book reviews are my favorite. Why? Well, I think that they're really illuminating for your own writing processes, for my own writing process, certainly, to see, for inspiration, just to see what plots are possible, what aspects or angles of memoir writing are possible, what characters exist, what to avoid, are there gaps in the literary world to be filled. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that when I sit down to write, I'm writing in response to the market. Not at all. It's more just a fun inspiration to see what's out there and how to respond to it. Also, the writing itself of book reviews, which will be our task for this next writing assignment, and hopefully will make its way into your critical essays, because one or several of the critical essay suggestions are to analyze or put under the microscope your own writing and your writing techniques and your texts that have served as sources of inspiration for you, or a comparison contrast of different books that you're using as research. So all of that is a form of a book review. It may not take the standard form. Of course, many book reviews are title, price, where to buy it, what the author thinks. We're not going to be writing that kind of book review. Of course, we're digging our heels in and being a little more creative, experimental, lyrical, and also more rigorous and analytical. Hopefully a combination of all of those things. So I just wanted to give you some ideas of where to look for book reviews, for sources. I'll be, of course, sharing some specific sources with you in our text, which after we finish reading Sister Outsider, we'll move to our third book, The World Split Open, which is primarily writers, great authors, and how and why we write. And many of those essays are forms of critical essays about authors and their inspirations, or other books or authors that they enjoy or have modeled themselves after, and those are forms of book reviews. I also want to recommend Lorrie Moore. I think that Valentine had mentioned that this is in the library. I hope that it is. And this book, probably many of these essays can be found independently published online. I don't mean independently published in various journals and magazines, and then were collected into this book. So Lorrie Moore, See What Can Be Done. If you look that book up, if you want to buy a copy, highly, highly recommended. If not, I know that many of these essays have been collected in, I'm reading in the book jacket right now, the New York Review of Books, New York Times Book Review, New Yorker, The Atlantic, The Guardian, Harper's, and elsewhere. So chances are you could find many of these online in various sources. I wanted to give you some specific recommendations for which of her book review and literary essays to find and read. I love all of them, but I recommend Anais Nin, Marilyn Monroe, where she compares two biographies, and it's a comparison contrast between a biography of Anais Nin and a biography of Marilyn Monroe, published around the same time, I think, 1987. So let's see, another would be, these are all Lorrie Moore's reviews. Margaret Atwood's The Robber Bride, 1993. She's written a few reviews of Margaret Atwood's through the years. So if you just look up Lorrie Moore, Margaret Atwood, I'm sure you'll find some good specimens. Joyce Carol Oates's Broke Heart Blues, 1999. Philip Roth's The Human Stain, 2000. Alice Munro's Hate Ship, Friendship, Courtship, Loveship, Marriage, 2002. So again, these are book reviews by Lorrie Moore about these books. Also recommend that book myself. Margaret Atwood's Oryx and Crake, which seems like a sort of apocalyptic sci-fi novel that's in many ways coming true now. So I would recommend reading that book as well, and reading Lorrie Moore's review of the book. Eudora Welty, 2006. Alice Munro's The Moons of Jupiter. She is a very prolific writer. Miranda July. It's a sort of an author review instead of a book review. So, okay, there are some recommendations, and I'll tell you why I recommend Lorrie Moore. She reviews books in a way where she, contrary to some of the other approaches that we've been taking, she removes herself, most of the time she removes herself from the essays. So she doesn't always appear as a character, but they are still written with great personality and intimacy. So it's this odd, she's kind of walking on this tightrope between a very personal and vulnerable style, but that she doesn't actually really appear. She's just noting her observations of the books and how they fit into contemporary culture and context and politics. And so she weaves in her experience of the book and then the world, but she doesn't necessarily give a lot of personal anecdotes. She doesn't say, when I was reading this book, I got a call from my grandma about her illness, and then the book related to my family's inheritance. It's not about her, it's about her experience of reading the book. And then beyond, connecting a book to another book or an author to his or her or their political context, etc. So it's not really Lorrie Moore as a character. That is an option, but one approach that I'm suggesting is that a book review that you are all going to be writing may not need to include you. It could. It can certainly be written with first-person pronouns. So I hope I'm explaining that correctly. She uses intimacy, but not necessarily, or a style of intimacy, but not necessarily appearing on the pages of her book review. She also uses humor, which I highly recommend. We need humor in these dark times. Hopefully you can see from my skeleton bats that I'm trying to see humor in the darkness. And I think that she is a really good source of inspiration because she follows this critical essay format of using quotations and citations and certainly acknowledging her sources. And she's very thorough. Here's a point that I would like to encourage or insist upon for your critical essays, is that if you write about a book or cite an author or use a quote, that you look into and get to know your sources so that you're not just pulling a quote out of nowhere. And that does come, I think that came up in the video that we watched about the 4 authors reading Audre Lorde, that Audre Lorde is very often misquoted, or that a quote is pulled without the context of an essay, or even a person might use a quote by Audre Lorde and not really know that much about Audre Lorde, and then it becomes a problem. So the particular quote that I'm thinking of is, "For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house." That is a quote that a lot of people like to use by Audre Lorde, and they don't acknowledge the essay that it originates in, Age, Race, Class, and Sex, Women Redefining Difference, or the book that it's contained in or was published in, or Audre Lorde's life or Audre Lorde's politics. So get to know the author, get to know the context, what year was it written, where are you pulling these quotes from? Similarly, when you're doing book reviews, if you are only reading one book of an author and then reviewing it, you should also look into what other projects they have done, maybe a little bit about the biography of an author so that you know a little bit about where the book sprung from, so it's not just out of the blue. This is something that Lori Moore is really good at. She seems to study every one of her subjects. Whatever she's writing about, she gets to know it thoroughly. So for example, in her book review that I mentioned earlier in this video, Anais Nin, Marilyn Monroe, she sort of gives an overview, a historical overview of the significance of even reading and talking about Anais Nin, and a little bit about Anais Nin's bio, and then she compares that alternately with the bio of Marilyn Monroe, and then also information about the authors of both of these biographies. And then she somehow seamlessly weaves them together. She also mentions, this is an interesting thing to do as well in your book reviews, if there are any other interconnected texts that you can refer to, including TV shows, movies that were adapted from books, blogs, bios, things that might not be the book itself, but that have entered our cultural conversation after the fact or before the fact, depending on the order of things. So highly recommend Lori Moore for inspiration. I also want to recommend, this is, I believe, on the syllabus, or at least in the asynchronous video for October 20th, the New Yorker's briefly noted sections, which you can find online. They're a paragraph. Of course, I will be encouraging you to write more than a paragraph, but it's a good place to start because you can see the components, the elements that you would need to include, including also style, voice, humor, historical context, things like that, and a summary, plot summary, or what genre is it? Is it a book of poems? Is it a fiction? Is it memoir? Is it in a series of books, or is it the author's first debut? Of course, the author's name and the title of the book, who's publishing the book, all of those really basic, essential things to include. And then from there, you can also see, obviously, the New Yorker publishes a lot of full-length book reviews that are delightful. So one that I would recommend in particular is the recent review of, actually there's a review in both the New Yorker and the New York Times of Marilynne Robinson's new book, Jack, that's in a series I don't know if any of you have read Marilynne Robinson, but her books include Housekeeping, Gilead, Home, Lila, and now Jack. So the book review is beautiful, and it is also just as much a biography of Marilynne Robinson as it is about the book, in order to contextualize the book in her oeuvre and also in contemporary literature and politics. Obama is mentioned several times. So it's a very thorough view. Takes the book as a stepping stone, and then we see the whole world of the book and why and how it's important to read it, or how to engage with the book. So that's one recommendation. The last recommendation that I'll give is I always read as well the Sunday New York Times, and if you're looking specifically for a book review of a certain genre, they do a really good job at filtering, both in their print and online, the graphic content, such as graphic novels and comics, the children's books, the YA books, the sci-fi, the mystery. So you can more easily, I think, find, and the poetry, and whatever your genre or medium is, it's a little bit easier to find book reviews about a certain topic and genre. So, for example, Hilary Shute often writes graphic content about graphic literature and comics for the Sunday New York Times book review. And I highly recommend this specific essay as a critical essay, and specifically a critical essay in which she compares two different books, and political context, historical context. So I'll write her name out and the name of the review and many of these other resources, but Hilary Shute, with 2 L's, Hilary Shute. And the review is of 2 different comics. And the title is sort of long, but it's 2 brilliant collaborations join art and story to fight racism and confront a debilitating disease. So there you see it's not simply a book review trying to get you to buy a book or to avoid buying a book. It's about very much race, politics, history, and graphic literature. So highly recommend it. And of course, she uses quotes from each book. She does close readings, which I think would be really important for your book reviews and really important for your critical essays. In fact, I think that it is somewhat of a requirement set forth by Rita. So we can talk more about that, and I will end there my spiel about book reviews.